I'm going to turn things over right away here to Drew Clark, who's our moderator for this discussion. And Drew is of counsel with Kirton and McConkie. He's also chairman and publisher of BroadbandBreakfast.com.
Thank you very much, Larry. All right, let me make sure I turn my microphone on.
Looks like you're good to go as long as that's glowing.
Which it isn't. Maybe we can have some video stops too.
There you go.
All right, great. Thank you for being here. Very inspiring to hear about 50 marathons, but 50 triathlons, but it seemed to take 50 triathlons to finish. So I'm happy to really dive into our topic today. And just a quick background for our discussion. There's an app for that, finding light bulb applications for the gigabit economy. We're going to be speaking about some of the amazing things that are going on from the perspective of networking, from the perspective of bandwidth, and from the perspective of applications for the next phase of our gigabit economy. There's 2 points I want to just emphasize before I turn to our great panel, which we have here to discuss this topics. And the first is about infrastructure and the vital role of infrastructure. And I wanted to read a small quote for you. This actually came from, well, I won't tell you what it came from until I read it. That's part of the point. Time and experience has verified to a demonstration the public utility of internal improvements, that the poorest and most thinly populated countries would be greatly benefited by the opening of good roads and in the clearing of navigable streams within their limits is what no person will deny. This was the very first political statement of Abraham Lincoln when he was running for state legislature in New Salem, Illinois in 1832. He didn't win that race, by the way. He won the next one in 1834. But infrastructure and improving infrastructure was a constant political theme in his life. And it was so because subsistence farmers had no way to get their crops to market, had no way to be part of the economy if they could not participate in the economic activity enabled by commerce. Well, today, of course, infrastructure is about internet and high-speed internet connectivity. And the way I often describe the work that a lot of the folks on this panel are doing and that I do in my role as of counsel at Kirton McConkie is we work with cities and companies that want to build gigabit networks because they know that the next generation of connectivity is going to come from advanced connectivity. We have, of course, from city to city, from San Francisco to Chicago to New York, with stops in Salt Lake and St. Louis and other cities, the backbones, right? And these can be thought of as the interstate highways of the internet. And there's a good bit of competition in these interstate highway networks. We have next the middle miles, which plop off of those big cities and serve a county or a larger region of a particular state. And over the last 5 to 6 years, we've seen incredible investment in middle mile networks, such that there is increasing competition and increasingly lower prices on middle mile networks. And what we're seeing now is the build out of the last mile, the local roads of the internet, if you will. And one of the great things of our panel here today is we have to my left Gary Crane, who's the city attorney for Layton, one of 11 cities that participate in the UTOPIA network, which is an early thinker about the way that cities can tap into economic development by having fiber optic networks within their communities as a way to attract businesses and enhance consumer benefits. We also have on this panel since Ray Timothy couldn't be in two places at one time, and he had been booked on two panels at the same time, we have Brian, I'm sorry, Barry Bryson, excuse me, Barry, who's the Associate Director of the Utah Education Network. And I know Barry will be able to speak a lot to UEN's role in serving community anchor institutions. One of our keynote speakers at lunch today will be John Windhausen, and John's the head of the Schools, Health, and Libraries Broadband Coalition. That is one of the organizations that represents the communities, and you can speak to this too, Barry, the communities that are benefited from vibrant gigabit and beyond connections. These types of connections have been greatly benefited from the investments in middle mile networks, because middle mile networks often build out from a locus of serving public buildings, hospitals, schools, and libraries. So it'll be great to hear more about your role at UEN, and also from the whole panel, the role that middle mile networks are playing. And I think, you know, we can't leave our introductions without also speaking to the open network aspect of networks such as UTOPIA and other networks around the country. I have up on the screen a article that I had written. I write a column every Sunday in the Deseret News, and I just want to read the first paragraph. Hopefully it's visible to some of you there. It's easy to plug in a refrigerator, television, alarm clock, or toothbrush into a wall socket. We forget the lesson that electricity became widely available only after a single application, the light bulb, caught the imagination and desire of the public. So that is our theme for our discussion. What else can you do with an open gigabit network besides the same old, right? Besides television, besides telephone, besides web browsing, emails. And again, I'm not trying to diminish the role and importance of those things, but there are so much more that we don't know yet what it is, just like the people who invented the toaster, the alarm clock, the refrigerator did not know that they would benefit from a network built up to bring light bulbs to people. So an open network such as UTOPIA has 14 active ISPs on it, and will just around the country there are networks being built that use this model that enable a great variety of retail providers to offer services. We have on our panel as well Jeff Christensen. Jeff is president of Entry Point Networks, which develops a software and hardware gateway that automates a lot of the processes for open networks, also serves to facilitate other networks as well. But Jeff can speak to some of the reasons that we haven't seen as much competition in the application space, but maybe we will see more. And we can talk as well, we'll have to cushion it for the general audience, but you know, what being able to have a layer 2 technology enables for the types of applications that we hope we'll be able to see. And then last but not least, on your right is Jacobus or Cobus Vandermeer. He is at the University of Utah. He's one of the people who have been very active in developing the technologies, the open source technologies and others that power software-defined networking and other tools that, again, I don't know enough about to say in detail, but I know that there are people out there, including Utah's own Glenn Reichert, who really was featured in this piece, a member of the Internet Hall of Fame, Chief Technology Officer for US Ignite, based here in Salt Lake City, and who has contributed enormously to helping this state have the kind of vibrant networks that we have in UTOPIA, in Google Fiber, and other networks from other providers that are here in our state. So let's actually turn to why don't we start with you, Gary, to talk just a little bit about how Layton, your city, has seen benefits from having the UTOPIA network, and also, you know, what you're seeing next down the pike as more people are conscious of the benefits of gigabit applications. We do have another microphone right here.
And the light is flashing. I love to see that. Because you either live by technology or die by technology, right? Isn't that what they say? And I am the least technologically savvy person up here, I want you to know. I'm riding a bicycle, the rest of them are in jets, I'm sure of it. But the things that I have learned about technology is the importance of it, the extreme importance of it. Just got back from a conference in Las Vegas of over 600 city attorneys. They could have blown the thing up and probably accomplished a lot with that many attorneys in one place. But we're in the Rio, and there were some things that I noticed. The first thing I noticed was when you came out to get a cab, there were all these cars that came up with a U on the window. And I'm thinking, what are these cars? Because people were just loading into these cars and traveling all over the place. I quickly learned that those are Uber cars. Uber cars, where do they come from? Somebody's got an app on their phone. They hit that app. The Uber car relationship is arranged with just a touch of that app. Somebody has made billions of dollars off of an application. And I'm talking billions of dollars. Uber is one of the biggest, as they indicated in there, one of the biggest transportation applications in the country. The second thing I did was I took a vacation. I had my daughter arrange a vacation for us after Las Vegas, and it was through Airbnb. I stayed in a little place on the beach down in San Clemente for $150 a night. It had 2 boogie boards. It had an umbrella. It had a bed. It had a fridge. It had all the other things that I needed, just like I lived there. Somebody else did live there, but they were renting it out. An app. An app got me to that place. An app took me inside. An app checked me out after it was done. I didn't see anybody. I didn't see anybody from the beginning of the trip to the end. And yet I understand that Airbnb is also one of the largest accommodation companies in the United States. This is a new generation of business. These people don't own any property. It's not like the two big beer companies that just kind of combined, where you've got facilities that essentially bottle beer, and you've got to sell it. You got to sell a product off the shelf. It's not like that anymore. So one of the things I've noticed is that you need that connectivity. That connectivity has to be there in order for you to be able these things to be able to operate. The hotel we were in was sadly deficient when it came to connectivity. Our rooms had a connection, and it was a very, very low connection. And in order for us to get a connection at the conference, it cost us $90, each attorney $90 a day for connectivity at the conference. That's ludicrous. In my opinion, that's ludicrous. In a day, and I had this little South Korean fellow that I met out in the lobby, and he goes, he could not understand why in America he could not get the same kind of connection that he had in Korea, where all he needed to do was go outside, open his iPad, and he could find out anything he needed to, and it was all wireless. It was wireless. Inside the building, he could connect up wired because everything was fibered, or outside he could get wireless anywhere. Well, that's kind of the vision that we had 12 years ago, 13 years ago, when we began the UTOPIA network. I was one of the first individuals involved in that in the very beginning, and I still remember being in the committee meeting up at the state capitol, and Greg Curtis, who later became a convert, by the way, who was the Speaker of the House, saying in that committee meeting, "Why should we pay so much for TV?" And all of us looked at him, and right now, right at that point, there wasn't an Uber. There wasn't a Airbnb. There weren't all of these applications that come through fiber and through connectivity. And it was a hard question to answer 12 years ago. But the interesting thing is 12 years later, 13 years later, it has borne out to be an accuracy, that it is as critical. And in fact, there was a term at the conference, the new water, broadband, is what it said. And that is true. Broadband is the new water. The new utility is what it is. We envision, and the city has begun to do this. We have a fiber network that goes all the way around Layton City. We haven't built that last mile to most of our homes and businesses because we are one of the last cities in the UTOPIA network to be built out. But about 50%, 40 to 50% of the cities right now have fiber that runs past every single home. It's a utility. And what we have done in Layton is the first thing we decided to do is to provide as much connectivity as we possibly could to everybody that we possibly could provide it to. And so in all of our parks, we have put a wireless system that delivers 50 megabits or better of service anywhere in the park. And that is free. You can walk across the street. So after school, they've got connectivity in the school and they've got fiber to the schools. After school, kid can go over to the park, open up his computer, and get as fast a service pretty much as he has, probably better than what he has at home.
Yeah.
And faster than or as fast as what he's got at school.
And that'll be great at eliminating what a lot of people are calling the homework gap, right? The problem between the high connectivity that people often have at school and a digital dearth where people may not have the connectivity they need.
That's correct. That's correct.
So Gary, you talk about the new water and the infrastructure component, and I'm wondering if you could just speak to, obviously it's taken some time to get where you are now, but a key part of the vision is that every home is going to be connected to this network. And that's a challenge that providers are facing throughout the country. That, in fact, today in New York City, there's a hearing that the City Council is having on whether or not Verizon's Fios product is passing and available in every location. It's an issue when new builders come in, like Google Fiber. They have a fiberhood model where they build to the demand, and there's some of that by necessity. But could you just speak to the universal nature of the build out that's planned?
The Layton City and the other 11 cities involved in UTOPIA came to the conclusion some time ago that fiber is a utility. And, we met with Kevin Lowe from Google on one occasion when he was visiting here in Salt Lake. And we asked him the question, how far should government go in providing and helping to facilitate broadband connections all across the United States? And at the conference that I just attended, that was the number one question of the technology group is, how do we get it in our jurisdiction? How do we get it there? And some of them were talking about some companies that innovatively were trying to put fiber through their sewer lines. Others were talking about the fact that they have sophisticated electrical companies that could probably run the fiber on poles. But the conclusion was that fiber is a necessity, and it is a utility, and there ought to be a point at which government provides it, and where the private sector and the government marry up together in order to provide an effective service. In other words, a public-private partnership. And we believe that connection, this is just the 11 cities, we believe that connection is the outside of a home. Currently, we will bring the service first mile, middle mile, and then last mile to the outside of a home, and then we allow private industry, which is the ISPs, to take it in the home and to sell whatever services they can. Much like what happens at the airport when Delta pulls its airplanes into the airport that is owned by Salt Lake City and maintained by Salt Lake City, or the highways where Federal Express and UPS all use the same highway in order to make a living. And so we believe that's those 11 cities.
Great analogies. Thank you for bringing those up, Gary. So let's turn to Barry and to talk a little bit about this public-private partnership concept we've been speaking about. But also, I think it'd be useful to give a quick summary of what is the Utah Education Network, what's distinct about it from other networks in other states from your perspective, and how you fit into the gigabit economy that you see developing.
Well, first of all, I think what's unique about UEN is I don't know of another state that has an organization like ours who has the communities of higher ed, K through 12, libraries, Head Starts. We also provide connectivity to the state government here for their internet connectivity. And recently here, within the last couple of years, the Utah Telehealth Network has become part of UEN, so we're now UETN. And we have a long-standing reputation of providing robust connectivity for a number. What we're really talking about here is killer apps for the gigabit economy. And I've been thinking about it a lot since I was informed yesterday that I needed to be here about our killer apps. And it's interesting, I've been with UEN for nearly 16 years. 15 years ago when I started, we had a single internet connection that was, I believe it was a DS3, and I think we were using 20 or 30 meg or something like that. And you know, the internet would go down because we only had a single connection. And it wasn't that big of a deal. I mean, it was an inconvenience to be off the internet, but it wasn't that big of a deal. So now, in our network at that time, we had that DS3 with about 20, 30 meg or whatever to the internet. And we had T1s at the schools. We had a 45 megabit backbone. Now, 15 years later, we have a 100 gig and 10 gig backbone running. We have gigabit Ethernet to almost every school in the state. There's still a few that are 100 meg that we're working on. We have schools that are coming up now that will have 10 gig. We have requests for this year for some large charters and some other large high schools and things to get 10 gigabit connections into these high schools. And so it started on our killer app originally was video, high quality two-way video. And there are a number of classes that are taught, for example, from USU up in Logan, and then beamed to hundreds of students, maybe even even thousands of students, right? With some of the classes. And when I hired on, we had implemented a project called Fusion, where we were taking multiple T1s and trying to keep up with the bandwidth. And it was really that video traffic that was really pushing things. And so that's really pushed things along. We now do high definition. I forget the term that it's like virtual presence or whatever type of thing. It's high definition. Yeah, it's actually rather unflattering. It's such good quality. But it takes an enormous amount of bandwidth, and we're able to do that because we've got these gigabit connections in. And back we started putting Ethernet connectivity and gigabit in the early part of the decade. And when we started doing that, when you go from T1 to 1,000 meg, people look at it and go, man, that's a lot of bandwidth. What are you going to do with it? But it's interesting. I was chatting with Matt Johnson with Alpine School District this morning when we came in, and I mentioned to him, I said, so like if your connectivity to UAN goes down, list all the things for me that you can't do now. So remember, I said 15 years ago it wasn't that big of a deal. Now, these are the things that don't happen at Alpine School District if they lose their connectivity to UAN. They can't do video surveillance in the schools because that all goes through the backbone and through all those connections. They can't make phone calls because, it's all the phone calls are over that. The building control systems, the school lunch systems, so that they can feed the kids, find out if they've got money on their lunch ticket. All of these things are now super dependent on that network, and so it's a quantum leap. And so thinking about killer apps, our future killer app is, one of the ones that's big now is, of course, the learning management systems, where students can participate in classes, and there can be homework assignments shared, and they can chat, and they can email the teacher, and they can even some of the systems you can even do video and voice and those kind of things. So those are big systems that we have that are killer apps for us. And then the new one is mobile computing. And when we talk about mobile computing at UEN and with the school districts, it's really about one-to-one computing. And as many of you may be aware, last week in the state board meeting, the essential elements plan for moving forward with one-to-one computing for every student in the state of Utah. That statewide plan has been drafted and unanimously approved with spontaneous applause from both the board and the audience for the efforts that have been towards to do that. And UETN's big role in that is going to be figuring out local area network connectivity and Wi-Fi as it relates to mobile computing and one-to-one.
Great to have those kinds of unanimity.
Yeah, And of course, that cannot happen without broadband connections into the schools.
How about the kind of the notion of flipping the classroom and doing lectures at home and having more discussion? How does that impact bandwidth?
I keyed right into the discussion about what UTOPIA has been able to do for communities, and I'll tell you what, one of the biggest challenges as we talk to the school districts as we go around the state is, it's great to take a Chromebook and put it in the hand of a student and when they're in the school with robust connectivity, but there's a lot of challenges for when they go home and try to do their homework and they have inadequate bandwidth at home. And that's something that we're trying to figure out.
Okay. Well, it's all pieces to the puzzle, and one we want to make sure to get in is the open access element and the technology elements to be able to address this. Jeff, why don't you speak to what Entry Point does to enable new sorts of applications? You speak a lot about the need to separate the infrastructure from the service provision. Could you talk about how that plays into the role of applications?
Sure. So when I talk about Entry Point and what we're doing, I can't talk about it without talking about Jacobus and what's going on at the University of Utah. In 2012, we had a vision of what we wanted to do, and Jacobus had just come to the University of Utah from AT&T Labs, and part of his focus at AT&T was network automation, and that was a piece that was necessary for what we were trying to do. So we connected with Jacobus and another professor at the U in security. And so when I talk about Entry Point, I don't think Drew knew when he asked Jacobus to be on the panel that he's really talking to two sides of the same coin, as far as at least this project that Jacobus has worked on. So. But I'll just say three things. I think our time's short. Three things that Entry Point's focused on. One is separating infrastructure from services. So for 99% of the networks in the United States, and really globally, I don't know that there's separation. True separation, both conceptually and technologically. One thing we're about is saying that the infrastructure is one thing, services running on the infrastructure are another thing. And so we technologically create that separation. Once you create that separation, then our vision is that infrastructure will be utility-like. That doesn't mean that an ILEC can't operate that utility, but we think that the right model is for the infrastructure to be a utility, and that services will be in the cloud. And that's really, Jacobus has written about this for a number of years. He refers to it as cloud-like. It's so cloud-like that I just say it's the cloud. And so we say cloud is coming to the carrier network, and in time we believe that services will be pulled down out of the cloud. And people are used to thinking about ISP. Well, we think there's going to be a lot more services than ISP. ISP will be one of them, but there will be many. And then the third thing is what's beyond the internet. And our response to that is that the internet's good for many things, but there are certain applications that should not ideally run over the public internet. And those are security issues, those are quality, reliability issues, and mobility issues as well. So I'm going to end there, and I'm going to hand the mic to Jacobus.
One of the big things that we're seeing nationwide in this discussion of gigabit applications is the merger of the smart cities concept and the role of super high-speed networks. And cities, in many cases, are driven to find ways to get gigabit networks because they want to provide greater services of smart cities. For example, I worked in Illinois as the executive director of the Partnership for Connected Illinois, and we worked with cities on the governor's Gigabit Challenge to bring gigabit connectivity. Aurora was one city, second largest city in the state, that actually got started on their gigabit network because of an intelligent transportation project that they had received funding for from NHTSA, the National Highway Transportation Safety. So it's about making city services more useful and usable. And so I'm certain that there's a lot of needs there to make use of higher security applications. So Jacobus, let's turn to you to tell us a little bit more about what inspired this work that you and your colleagues at the U have been doing, and tell us what its significance is. What does it really mean for the world of residential and business telecommunications?
Yeah, so I think that the best analogy for me is if you think about some of the apps that were mentioned here, Uber, things that you do on your smartphone. Why did that happen? Right? It happened in part because, well, you have a smartphone, you have a phone that can actually run these sophisticated applications. But beyond that, it just became so easy to develop these apps, right? And we can make the same analogy with cloud computing, right? It used to be that we had data centers, and you kind of, you took a couple of weeks, if you were lucky, maybe a couple of months to get a new server. And now we have cloud computing, and you go to Amazon and you provide your credit card and you have a server, right? It's the ease of use and the ecosystem that comes with that. And so I think the vision that we've developed with the entry point folks is, what does that look like in a network, right? In a network, a lot of things are still done in a fairly manual fashion, right? You put in an order, and someone gets that order, and they go and configure some switches, and it takes time. Now, you know, don't get me wrong, pulling a fiber, it'd be hard to do that instantaneously, right? But once your infrastructure is there, and I think that's the beauty of thinking of a more open access network. Once we have that infrastructure there, providing services or even applications on top of that should be like cloud computing, right? And this is where Jeff was saying earlier, we want to make this cloud-like, right? And so what do I mean with that, right? Yes, I think some of the applications or services will be connectivity. It will be like we think about it today, connectivity to the internet. But we think there will be a lot more to it. And it should be that my service can be as lightweight as an application, right? So let me give you a concrete example. One of the applications or services that my students prototype in working with the entry point folks, we call it a LAN party service, right? And so imagine you play a game, and what you want is low latency, high capacity. And you want to play it with your friends that are also connected to the UTOPIA network, right? And so what you want to do is just go and say, hey, create us a LAN party. And you invite your friends, and they sign up, and you play for a couple of hours, and you have high capacity, low latency, and you have a fantastic time. And when you're done, that network, that virtual network that you created, disappears, right? That's the sort of dynamicity that we envision. Now, LAN party, well, okay, maybe you have more ambitious or more professional needs in mind, but that's the idea, that these things should be so lightweight and so easy to create that these things can just happen, right? And that's to come back where I started. I think that's the analogy with cloud and with smartphone app ecosystems. It just became so easy to develop these things that you don't have to be, have a PhD in computer science to develop these things. You just kind of follow the Hello World example and elaborated a little bit on it, and voila, you had a new application.
And nor do you need a permission to innovate. It's permissionless innovation, right?
Exactly.
Even for things that seem crazy, like who would want to send a message in 140 characters or less? I mean, what a stupid application, right? And yet it's transformed the world of journalism and communication and the way we network with one another by these applications that may seem crazy or pointless or trivial, and we don't know where they're going to come from. I think that's kind of what you're getting at, right, Jacobus?
Yeah, and so just to finish the story off, what you need to do that, of course, is automation, right? I mean, if you go to Amazon, you provide your credit card, you have a virtual machine running in a minute. there's a lot of magic happening behind the scenes. And so the work we've been doing with Entry Point is to kind of to provide that magic, if you will, behind the scenes, so that from a user perspective, it looks so easy, it just works. And the other thing that we've done is to think about, well, who are the role players in this environment, right? Because you have someone runs the infrastructure, and if it breaks, it needs to be fixed. But then you have these other application service providers on top of that, and how do you interact between them, and how do you protect their business interests in a way where you still have this openness and innovation, but you don't have the land party now messing up your public safety network, right? We have that the guarantees to separate these things.
Well, Glenn Reichert, the figure I mentioned earlier in the Internet Hall of Fame, who unfortunately is not here today, he's tried mightily to explain software-defined networking to me, but the basic concept I get from it is that we're just bringing a level of flexibility where everyone can be their own internet service provider or application service provider or hook up to these kinds of networks we've been speaking about. I know we're over time, but I want to just give everyone a chance to maybe say one or two things that you're looking forward to technologically over the next 3 to 5 years. And let's actually start down here with Gary and run down the line here.
We're just looking forward, I think, to the day when I can walk outside and open up my iPad and use it wirelessly. And when I can go to my neighbors who are doing genealogy on the one side, they're 82 years old. They hooked up to UTOPIA the other day, and they're doing genealogy, and that's their whole purpose in life, and they love it. And they love how fast it is, and they love the fact that it downloads and uploads symmetrically. There's no restriction on it.
That's right.
And so those are the things that I hope we were able to accomplish as communities, and there are a lot of pieces to that, because there's even zoning pieces that exist as a result of that. I look forward to the day when our police officers can drive throughout the city and access their computers from a wireless system that is transported by fiber rather than through the 3G network or 4G network that they're using today. Those are the types of things that we look forward to, and looking forward to that going all the way to the end of the row, to the very lowest of income, all the way to the very most profitable business in the city.
So I think I'm looking forward to the day when technology, I'm a pretty technical person, but we're in the early days of a lot of these evolutions. And I'm just looking forward to the day when technology kind of gets out of my way and lets me do my job and live my life, and I just don't have to think about it, because as fancy as things are, technology is still pretty complex, even for the end user.
An artificial assistant there. So.
Yeah, I don't know if it's artificial assistant or if it's just, your device just does what you want it to do all the time. Intelligence, yeah.
Great.
I'm going to refer to Kevin Kelly, who's the editor at Wired Magazine. So he's got a couple of TED Talks that are worth listening to. And then he wrote a book called What Technology Wants. That's a thick read. You can just read the last chapter or watch the TED Talks and you get the point. But he says what technology wants is choice, flexibility, diversity, and he uses all of these adjectives, but it comes down to what technology wants is choice, and that's what technology evolves to, is choice. And choice opens up chance for people, opportunities for people. And so what I look forward to is for networks to become subscriber-centric, and that means that subscribers get what they want, the kind of flexibility, the kind of openness, the kind of opportunities that networks are capable of delivering. And so it's choice or subscriber-centric networks that I'm looking forward to.
Great, thank you.
So I'll key off of what Jeff said, and I think choice is definitely something to look forward to. But I think more than just consumer choice, I think we're at a tremendously exciting time in networking. I think in terms of open access networks, we've been talking about that a little bit this morning. I think the next big thing in terms of openness is going to be in the mobile space. There's the FCC has a lot of initiatives to open up spectrum. We're going from 4G to 5G. No one really knows what that happens. Normally when people give talks about it, they kind of wave their hands. And that's sort of what 5G is. But a lot of, I think we're in for tremendous change in the industry because of this openness. Yes, there's software-defined networking, but people talk about software-defined infrastructure, which basically just says everything is software-defined. I have this flexibility, this virtualization. I can get what I want in a very flexible way. And I think that is going to change the way that we do business across the spectrum. Yes, in fixed wireline, in mobile networking, and I think it's maybe in 10 years' time we will not have Verizon and AT&T and just the incumbents. We might have lots of new players in these spaces just because things are being opened up in this way.
Well, thank you for participating, and appreciate your bearing with us. And if you could join me in giving a warm thank you, round of applause to Gary and Barry and Jeff and Jacobus. Appreciate it.